So you learned one of the great secrets that rabbis know this morning. The Torah is a collection of myths. It's legends. It was crafted by our ancestors. And its value doesn't lie in its fact that it's an historical document, that it's a timeline, that it's a history book. Its value lies in its creative ability of our ancestors to create these amazing myths that echo across the generations. There are those who get really upset with what we do. They call what we're doing sacrilegious because we acknowledge the human origins of the Torah. I say to deny the human origin of the Torah is to diminish the Torah. To deny the human origin of the Torah is to miss the bold, creative acts that our ancestors undertook. They were willing to create stories in order for the Jewish people to survive. The story that we read this morning and we read last week of the Israelites poised to enter the Canaan, that's a legend. It isn't true. Should I say that again? It's a legend. It isn't true. Somehow we walk away from religious school and we have this image in our head that there was a scribe standing there. Okay, Joshua, would you repeat that for the Babylonian times? We want to get that in there. Or we imagine that someone's listening, they snuck into the tents and they wanted to hear what there were no reporters present. It was a legend. At best, one of the streams was written about 500 years after those events. Longer, some of this stuff was written 1,000 years. 1,000 years after those events might have occurred. 500 years. Think about it. Do we know what happened 500 years ago? And they weren't sitting around with documents trying to put together a story. They being our ancestors, were reshaping their past, in order to create a new legend that would help them justify the religious political struggle that they were in at their time. That was the point of the story. We appreciate the stories because we begin to get some insights. They were shaping the past. They were reforming it in order to justify a position that they held. They created pseudo-history. Regrettably, too many Jews to think today that that's a history book. It isn't. It is a legendary text that gives us insight into the dramas of our ancestors. They were dealing with something. We don't have time to go exactly why they wrote that story, but they were dealing with some change, and they created this amazing story. It's a classic dilemma. Standing at the edge. Have you ever been there? Standing at the edge of something absolutely new. You're frightened, not sure what to do. Do you go back to the past, to what you know? Go back to slavery? Or do you walk into the future and the unknown, and there are Nephilim there and Anakites and people you don't know? Are your weapons strong enough? They were poised to enter the promised land, and they had two sets of reports. 10 of the 12 scouts said, don't do it, big mistake. 2 said, go forward, Joshua and Caleb, move into the future, go into the unknown. And then our ancestors crafted this tale, said, okay, what happens? 12 spies, 2 good, 10 negative. All of a sudden, the Israelites are standing there, and they're anxious. They're looking at Moses, their leader. They're turning on him, literally saying, why did you lead us out of Egypt? Better that we should have stayed there. Better to have been slaves than you to bring us to this lousy place, and we're going to die. What an amazing myth. It's archetypal. It is a quandary of epic proportion. Step forward into an unknown stream, not sure of the ground beneath your feet, or retreat into the known, onto the land that you already know, even when it's bad, even when it's slavery. We tend to forget that our ancestors' world was changing around them. Maybe not as quickly as our world, and they certainly didn't have the internet and Twitter and everything that we knew to know how quickly it changed, but their world was changing around them. They went from being a nomadic people to an agricultural people, from an agricultural people to an urban people, to a super-urban people, and even a highly urbanized people. There was globalization. We tend to forget there was globalization. There was influences by the Greeks coming in. They were beginning to respond to that. There was Greek thought. Judaism didn't exist in a vacuum. It was a dynamic civilization that was wrestling with all kinds of change that was taking place, and unless our ancestors responded, Judaism would have withered on the vine. While this tale wasn't meant to give us any insights into today, it wasn't written for us. It was written for the people thousands of years ago. But it was a well-crafted legend. The power of legend and the power of storytelling is that when it's well done, the essential issues resonate. They continue to echo. That's the power of great literature. And this is great literature. It is not great history. They created a story. The future or the past? Which way do we turn? It seems to me that Jews of the 21st century, we are at the same place. Not the same piece of land. We're at the same intellectual place. We're at the same critical moment, a juncture in Jewish history about whether we go forward or whether we go back. This has happened before in the Jewish people. That's why the rabbis keep talking about it. All these legends about tension, because there have been these kind of crucial moments and juncture. I have to say that today, in my role as a rabbi participating in conversations locally, nationally, and internationally, I am in more conversations now about what is going to be the future of Judaism. What's it going to look like? There are people who are scared, and they're frightened, and they're unsure if there will be a Jewish future. These discussions have been going on for quite a while. I've been participating on them for a while now, a couple of years. But this year I felt a new energy. It's animated in a way I haven't sensed before. I think people are beginning to realize if we don't move, we're going to die. There has been paralysis. People are unsure. Paralysis sets in when you don't know if you should go backwards or you should go forwards, and you stand there. And paralysis is fine for a minute or two or a decade perhaps in Judaism, but paralysis in Judaism for too long will ensure our demise. And there's this energy. We have to do something. So I have been at meetings after meetings after meetings. If I had to define one thing that I've done this past year, it's been going to meetings talking about the Jewish future. Now, these are not abstract meetings. I've gone to sort of the intellectual ivory tower kinds of meetings for years as well as a rabbi. But the meetings I'm going to are, what's going to get funded? Which program is going to ensure that there is going to be a Jewish tomorrow, and who's going to pay for it, and when, and how do we get it started? And I've been at meetings where I say, things aren't working, that funding's going to be cut. These are really heated conversations, energized, not in arguments, but a sense that we better do something. And then always somewhere in the course of one of these conversations, usually at some point it's, and what's the message going to be? What are we going to say Judaism is in the 20th? You know what the conversation's about. What's the message going to be about the 21st century Judaism? And I get engaged in that. And you can imagine that that conversation isn't always the quietest of conversation. Whose voice is going to be heard? What's going to be heard? What's tomorrow? The conversation's taking place not just in small meetings and just among rabbis. It's lay people. It's professionals. It's spilling into the Jewish press all over. And there was a recent exchange that caught my attention. You may have seen it. I apologize if you have, but if you didn't, it was an interesting exchange. It was a lay leader started the first volley. The lay leader was the head, I think, at one time of the United Jewish Campaign, the big fundraising. Claiming he was not Orthodox, he declared that reform and conservative Judaism are largely irrelevant in North America, and that the non-Orthodox way of life is failing by every metric. This was a non-Orthodox Jew that essentially declared reform and conservative Judaism worthless, worse than worthless, that it's failing. We're failing. Secular Judaism's failing. And he began to go on to say how orthodoxy is the only future of Judaism. Now, you can imagine that not everyone was thrilled when they read this. So the former president of the Union of Reform Congregations, the Reform Association, Rabbi Eric Yaffe, who's announced his retirement, wrote a response. And I don't know what got me more upset, the first article or the response. Because the response was what I would think was a regressive statement. I'm going to quote two little pieces of it. In his defense of Reform Judaism, he said, "Do we need to study Torah, embrace Jewish ritual, and observe Shabbat? Absolutely." And then, to punctuate this return to the past, to tradition, he quoted his Orthodox daughter. This is what he quoted as support for what Reform Judaism is doing. "We observe Shabbat because it's part of the eternal covenant between God and the Jews that invokes the miracle of creation and the exodus from Egypt and links me to Jews throughout the centuries." The president of the Reform movement is talking about the exodus of Egypt as it is a historical fact. It's a legend. He's referring to creation, the mythology, if that's going to be our future. His response was tepid at best. I will give it to you if you'd like to read the full text. It lacked creativity, it lacked boldness, it lacked a future. It was at best that I could see watered down Orthodox Judaism. But his wasn't the only tepid response I have listened to in the last 2 years. I have been at more meetings where the focus is about the past rather than the future, always claiming this is what the future is going to be. I have sat in meetings growing frustrated, ready to shout out. I felt like one of the two spies that said, "Did you miss it? That's the future. You're talking about the past." Now, some of you may think that my lack of compassion, perhaps is the word, is just simply a response to the nature that I get frustrated quickly. It's not just that I get frustrated quickly. My reading of Jewish history says what's happening now, this sense of turning back, is wrong. Judaism, when you look at our history, is a series of jigs and jags, radical, dramatic changes that have taken place. Ellis Rifkin wrote a book called The Shaping of Jewish History. Dr. Rifkin was a professor of mine at the Hebrew Union College. And in his historical text, he argues that Judaism survived as a result of what he called quantum leaps. Changes that were so radical that prior to their occurring, you could not have imagined them occurring. You could never have imagined if you belonged to the temple cult. I'm not talking about a temple locally. I'm talking about the temple cult when they sacrificed animals. You could never have imagined Judaism without temple. But somehow the rabbis created a new Judaism, absolutely different than any existed before. There was a time that people couldn't have imagined Judaism without prophets. When was the last time you worried about prophets? Not with an F, with a PH. Make sure we're on the same conversation. Okay. I'm sorry, it's just the economy's on everyone's mind, even when we're not talking about the economy. Can you imagine Judaism? We don't have kings anymore. We don't have prophets anymore. We don't have Judaism survive. What Rifkin argues and what our history demonstrates, they are these massive changes that have allowed us to survive because they were willing to let go of the past. The fascinating thing that we fail to understand is the rabbis and the leaders of Judaism throughout the ages were less committed to a sense of narrow ideas. Their commitment was to an ongoing Jewish people. And they recognized in order for the people to survive, you had to let go. You had to let go of narrow thinking. You had to let go of things of the past in order so that there would be a tomorrow. Their commitment was to the future. It wasn't to the past. They were committed to a people, an experience, an evolution, not something that was frozen in time, not idol makers. The first midrash that I learned as a kid was about Abraham, the mythic father of the Jewish people. Lots of us learned it. The first thing, he broke the idols of his father, right? And then he was sent on his way. That's Judaism. We are not supposed to be idolaters of anything, even of our own making. Too often today, Jews build their own idols, and they think because they're our idols, we're not supposed to smash them. Jewish history says we smash all idols, even those we hold most dear, because when you hold an idol, you hold it so tightly, the present and the future slips through your fingers. Communities evolve. That was the commitment of our ancestors. They were willing to embrace something new in order to save this people. Our commitment should be to the Jewish people, not to a single manifestation of Judaism. Without change, Judaism will die. And it needs to be intellectually curious and honest. While Rabbi Baum was sharing the mythology of the Nephilim, and we may go, why isn't that bizarre? They were using the best craft of their age. Those were dynamic rabbis. They were creative thinkers. They knew Greek mythology and they were bringing it in. They weren't afraid of the other people. They took the knowledge that they had and brought it to Judaism. These were intellectually curious, intellectually honest, intellectually dynamic people, and we tend to see them frozen in time. They recognized that change, incremental change, minor change isn't always sufficient. That there needs to be a willingness at times to address bold, new ideas. I happen to think, and my experience in this last year has confirmed for me, that many of the Jewish people have become like the spies who feared the future, who gave the negative reports, who created the environment in which those former slaves were so anxious about the future, they wanted to return to slavery. They wanted to go back. I think a lot of the people, lay and professional, that I meet are like those folks, those people who are giving those tepid responses. Those are the 10 slaves who said we shouldn't go. People are confusing protecting the past with ensuring the future. We've gotten to this place in Judaism that we believe that it's disloyal to say change is okay. That somehow a static Judaism, fixed and frozen in time, is now authentic Judaism. We've allowed old modes of belief to push out modern ideas and bold thinking. It seems that today's generation is more infatuated with the past than they are with embracing the future. There seems to be a sense within the current community that the past somehow is the most authentic manifestation of Judaism. It's as if today people are more concerned about those who love the past than those who are committed to the future. My survey of Judaism reveals to me that those who dress and act as if they live in prior centuries are often held up as being the symbols of an authentic Jewish experience. Even the liberal movements have regressed. If you joined us last week for Rosh Hashanah and you had a chance to hear Rabbi Baum's Rosh Hashanah morning service, he addressed this. How the Reform movement itself was once, both of us having trained at Hebrew Union College, a bold movement. Its early Pittsburgh platform, dynamic, crucial, brought the Judaism of the Reform movement into the future and how it's lost its way. If you've not listened to that sermon, you can go online and watch it in archives. It's an important sermon to hear because it speaks to how liberal movements are moving into the past. Why do we move into the past? It's safe. It's easy. We know it. It gives us something to do, and we don't have to think. The slaves were willing to go back because it was the easiest thing to do. We stand at a juncture, this moment, just like the authors of that tale were describing, where we have to make a decision. And what happened? We need to look at that tale because I think the authors of that tale were telling us exactly what the future's about. 12 spies. 10 give a negative report. The majority is don't do it. And two say the future's in Canaan. We got to cross the border. We got to go in. We can do this. Those who listened to the majority, who said it's scary, that the future's scary, what happened to the Jews? Rabbi Baum told us just a few minutes ago. They were punished 40 years of wandering. The punishment for not going in, for being scared, for being afraid of the future, was to wander for 40 years so the cowards would die. And only 2 survived. right? Joshua and Caleb. And it says, our tradition says, a new generation arose who were prepared to enter the land. The minority opinion, the courageous opinion, the bold opinion was the right one. Our ancestors told us that. They said, those who listen to the majority, who fear the future, you are wrong. And then when the Israelites realized what their punishment was going to be, they said, okay, we'll go in real quick. That's in the story too. I didn't make that up. And it was too late. They hesitated, and it was too late. The authors couldn't have been clearer. They couldn't have been any clearer. If we retreat, we will die. We need to enter the land. We need to move forward. We need to innovate. If we hold on too tightly to the past and not make bold choices, we will not survive. Judaism's survival does not depend upon cautious people who merely repeat what was created by our ancestors. It is bold and thoughtful people who recognize when we're standing at the edge of something new, we must enter it even when it is scary. This is what our ancestors were trying to tell us in the story. That's what the story was trying to echo across the generations. Move forward, embrace change. Do not retreat. Do not hesitate. I believe that members of Beth Adam and those who support ourjewishcommunity.org, our online congregation, come from that stream, that alternative stream of Judaism, the two minority spies, the two spies who said, yes, we can't enter the land. Yes, we can move forward. Yes, we can embrace change, even though it is frightening and scary. That's the history of this place, of Congregation Beth Adam. When we began more than 30 years ago, people said, Cincinnati already had enough liberal congregations. There doesn't need to be one more. You can't make it. And we believed in the future. We believed the change was happening and that we needed to give voice to it. And you who are here and those who are with us online joined in part, became part of that community. You recognize that the future needs to be embraced. When we began ourjewishcommunity.org, our online congregation 4 years ago, this is our fourth high holidays, people said we were silly. It was a flight of fancy. It was cute. It was never going to make a difference. Over 200,000 people, let me say that again, over 200,000 people have been touched by ourjewishcommunity.org. 200,000 people around the world. When we walked into services tonight, there were people from Poland and Israel and South America and Geneva and across North America joining in services because they want to have a voice. They aren't afraid of the future. That's what we did. We had a bold response, a creative response to a changing world. We're like the spies who said, move forward. I'm proud to be part of that stream of Judaism. I'm proud to call the mythic characters Caleb and Joshua my ancestors. I know they didn't exist, but I know that the authors of that text, I don't know their names, but I know that they were so concerned about the future. They created two iconic figures who were willing to stand up in the face of those who feared and spoke power. It seems to be both the mythic tales and the historic reality of Jewish experience tells us clearly what we need to do. And I believe that one of my responsibilities as the rabbi of Congregation Beth Adam and as the rabbi, one of the rabbis of ourjewishcommunity.org, is to represent those ideals in every meeting I go to. I know some people think I'm a nudge. My wife probably does too. but that's another conversation, that's another sermon for another Yom Kippur, I suppose. But I go to these meetings going, I need to continue that voice. I need to continue that voice. That's my responsibility. That's why I was willing to take on the mantle of being a rabbi. Without stretching the metaphor too far, I think Rabbi Baum and myself are like Joshua and Caleb. We're those voices who go into the meetings and when we're sitting there and everyone's talking about the past, we say, what about the future? When everyone's giving variations on what they've already done, we say, that model was 1980. That model doesn't work anymore. We know it. We need to change. And we're all in this together. All of us. Rabbi Baum and I may be the voices at time, but we're all participants. In that myth that we read when they were standing at the edge of Canaan waiting to go in, there were no bystanders. Everybody was a part. Those who argued with Moses and those who stood silent. So it is today. We're all part of it. All of us who identify with the Jewish people are part of this moment. What happens will affect all of us. We all have a right and we all have a responsibility to be involved, to have our voices heard, to help shape the Jewish future. We who see ourselves coming out of that stream of Jewish thought that embraces the future, we have a responsibility today to make sure our voices are heard, that we are organized. Sharing the holidays is a wonderful thing, but we must do more than share our holidays together. We must share in joined action. We must work together and give voice. The future of Judaism will be determined by those who get involved. I don't know how the future will exactly turn out. I'm not all sunshine and roses. I know there are going to be moments, I'm not foolish, that are challenging. Just like those who wrote that story said the future's uncertain, they were willing to take the risk knowing that going to the past wasn't the answer. They knew that certainly was a prescription for failure. Our survival depends upon throwing off the shackles of the past, not allowing those who say the past is where it is safest to hold sway. It's time to stop defining Jewish authenticity by the number of ancient rituals one embraces or by parroting the words of our ancestors. Jewish authenticity is not future-phobic. It embraces the future, celebrates change. Authentic Judaism isn't dressed in black. It doesn't stifle women's voices. It doesn't define itself by rules that were created by others. Authentic Judaism has been and must continue to be defined by a willingness to walk into the future even when we're not certain. Authentic Judaism means having faith. I talked about faith last week. Faith in people. Faith in the creative spirit of our people. We are a resilient people. Our ancestors were incredibly bold. I have faith that we, this generation, can be as creative and as bold as our ancestors have been. I believe in that. That is authentic Judaism. Authentic Judaism does not mean holding on to the past. It means embracing something new. Authentic Judaism is of this age. It's living our lives today. Just as the mythic characters who stood trying to decide if they should enter or go, we're doing that right now. Every meeting I go to, each of us, everyone in the sanctuary, all of you who are brought to us through the internet, who are joining us through services, we're part of this. No matter how we see our involvement, how much involved or how little we're involved, we're part of this moment. There are no bystanders in the future of the Jewish people. We're all participants. Our voices will be heard or they won't be heard, depending on us. So what happened to Joshua and Caleb? They stood there and they shouted, but they weren't heard because no one was standing with them. The 10 spies who argued for fear and retreat, people joined and stood with them. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. Our future depends on those who want a modern Jewish future. Shoulder to shoulder, unapologetic, confident, willing to enter the future even when we're uncertain. That is what's necessary for a strong future to be built. We need everyone who believes in this vision to raise up their voices, to be counted, to stand together with us. The future awaits. Our actions will determine whether our people retreat into our yesterdays or are willing boldly to walk into tomorrow.